Jamie Weiss, the Habitat Hero Coordinator for Audubon Rockies. I've been with Audubon Rockies now since 2014 with the Habitat Hero programs. We've got to see it grow over the years. And the whole idea behind this program is planting a better world for birds and people. And it directly falls in line with National Audubon's initiatives under the Planting for Birds initiative, or Creating Bird-Friendly Communities initiative. And this program, I'll kind of give a 10,000-foot overview on our work and some metrics and ways to get engaged. And then we'll switch gears and talk about what you can do to create a bird-friendly garden of your own. We'll do some birding as well, talking about some plants that you can incorporate into your landscape, what birds you might be attracting. And then we'll open it up for a Q&A, and I'll talk about some upcoming projects and volunteer opportunities or ways to get engaged this spring as well. Since you're not too far away from Fort Collins, you might make it up this way later this spring for some planting projects that we have. But to kick things off, just the whole idea is that your own garden, whether it be your front yard or your backyard, can truly be valuable habitat. We're going to talk about planting bird-friendly plants to provide birds with food, shelter, and of course, a place to breathe. That's the core idea behind this program. I'm sure you're very familiar with the Audubon structure, but I do like to just remind folks, Audubon Rockies is the regional office of National Audubon, and our programs cover Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, and then we engage the local chapters within that tri-state region for programs and events, volunteer opportunities, etc. So with this program, we're trying to empower engagement through a variety of platforms. And historically, this program started out in creating bird-friendly gardens in your backyard or in your own yard. And we're starting to kind of expand upon that and start looking at some of these mega planting projects, which I'll get into in a little bit later on, looking at landscape scale conservation through the lens of a bird. But with our certification program, we have a bronze, a silver, and a gold. I don't know if it'll show it. Let me unblur it so you can see the thing. It's also in the photograph in the slide. But the certification piece, the bronze, silver, and gold, we certify residential gardens, public gardens, private lands. And there's a set of criteria that we look for. We'll talk about some of that criteria in a moment. But the whole idea is to reward your gardening efforts and hopefully inspire your neighbors or other community members to create their own bird-friendly gardens too. We do a lot of events. Some of them are in person, some of them are online, and then some are now hybrid events. Last year in 2022, we had 44 events, so almost one a week, reaching a little over 7,000 individuals with our programs. Sometimes these events are led by myself. Other times they're large workshops where we invite community organizations, keynote speakers. They kind of run the whole gamut. Volunteers, we love our volunteers, the crux of the organization and the work that we do. And volunteers specific to the Habitat Hero program help with planting events. They help with maintaining demonstration gardens. They help go into schools and give our curriculum on our Habitat Hero traveling trunk and reading our Pollinator Pals books. They come out to festivals or events and man a table. Volunteers can also pick up the phone and call a nursery, a local nursery, and just talk to the nursery manager or the buyer of plants and encourage them to order more native plants for the next season. It can also be done on your couch, doing some more social media posts or writing letters to your elected official. So we try and have a lot of different options for everyone. Even if it's just going outside and talking to your neighbors and encouraging them to plant more native plants. There's lots of ways to volunteer and help spread the word on bird-friendly gardens. We have a robust online resource library to help make it easy to walk through the gardening process. The 5-step gardening process. Step 1 is kind of what we're doing tonight, kind of learning the how and why native plants are so critical to the survival and vitality of our local ecosystems. We have great articles and books and other resources on that step. And then we talk about, where do you find these plants? Audubon now has a wonderful native plant database searchable by zip code. I'll share that link here in a little bit. Then we talk about, how do you design these gardens once you find these plants? So we have some pre-planned garden designs and also garden in the boxes where you get the design and the plants all in one. And then how do you certify your newly planted garden? To how do you get the most from your landscape, whether that be through community science or volunteerism? So that's a really great link. Here in a moment, I'll share, I can share right now even. Let me get that up. Here we go. We'll chat that and then I'll get my screen back up. So yes, that's the online resource library link, so you can walk through all of those resources just mentioned. Social media, if you have a strong presence on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, we share not only our Habitat Hero news, but our other programs on there as well, whether that be upcoming events, articles, newsworthy facts, and we have 6 programs within Audubon Rockies, so you can learn about all the work that we do. And then our demo gardens, we have 16 of them now in northern Colorado. They're expanding across the region. Most of them have fancy interpretive signage, so you can learn about the partners involved, what plants are used, what birds we're trying to attract, and hopefully inspire you to plant some of those plants that would work well in your own landscape as well. As mentioned, we're trying to think about not just what you can do in your own backyard, but how we can look at landscape scale conservation through the lens of a bird, because we know birds don't stay in our yards every day. They oftentimes migrate through or have seasonality or different patterns to them. Clark mentioned earlier in his highlights about the Bohemian waxwings, kind of seeing that shift about every 10 years or so, a big flock of them come through. So it's really nice to be able to think about this program and creating, whether it be small gardens, even a few planted containers on a balcony make a difference, to some of our larger scale projects where we're looking at partnering with solar arrays and planting, upwards to 5,000 plants on a 40-acre plot. But this program does really well in focusing in areas that are populated in the suburban urban matrix. And this little graphic will highlight why we're focusing our areas in that suburban urban matrix. So here's the year 1940. The areas that are red or bright orange, those are your areas of highest housing density units. And we're going to jump up through the decades through like a little comic book strip. And you're going to see that population explode, especially along, which we all know, that I-25 urban corridor. I'm sure you've all seen a map very similar to this. And it's certainly not to focus on the doom and gloom piece of it, but more an opportunity for change and why we look at engaging our community members in residential areas and preserving habitat right in our own landscape. Of course, we want to protect national parks and state parks and national forest land, but that's not what this program looks at. So let's jump up through the decades. Here's 1950. Keep your eyeballs again on that I-25 urban corridor. 1960, the westward expansion, spilling more westward. We don't have isolated cities as much anymore as we start to crawl westward. More urban sprawl. And then this next slide is actually going to jump up to the projected look at 2030. Look at that state of Colorado too. Holy cow. So in that time frame from 1940 up until now, about 150 million acres of ecologically productive land has gone towards urban sprawl, with about 43% of that land conversion looking something like this. The suburban urban matrix dominated with something we've all seen before like this, turf grass and asphalt. Where I got some of these stats from is Douglas Tallamy. He's a fantastic author. You can get his books from the library. His first one is called Bringing Nature Home. That's where I got some of these stats from. And then the second one is Nature's Best Hope. We'll use some of, or I'll illustrate some of his research here in a moment. But some of those staggering stats here, we have over 40,000 square miles of pavement and over 60,000 square miles of suburban lawns in the lower 48 states. And 98% of our lower 48 states have been altered for human use and has this very similar looking like landscape here. So Habitat Hero, we're going to shift the paradigm on its head and start creating a living landscape for birds and pollinators. Be great for our environment, be great for our connecting ourselves with nature. And you can see if you're a bird looking to rear your young and you're searching for food or to seek shelter, a landscape that looks like this, your options are pretty meek, right? Pretty bleak. So let's beef it up with native plants. Let's beef up our landscape with more native plants. Why native plants, do you ask? Wouldn't any plant just do? We'll get into that. Native plants, we're going to learn about all their wonderful benefits and learn about how they are so important to our food web value support too. They're better for birds. 96% of our terrestrial birds feed their young insects, and you need a really strong foundation of native plants to support insects, to support our bird populations and our whole food webs. In a little bit later on, we'll talk about a very specific example of native plants versus non-native plants attracting insects. It's better for us. Of course, we want to drive to Rocky Mountain National Park and connect with nature that way. It's gorgeous, but that doesn't mean we can't connect with nature right in our own backyards and connect with our neighbors. And it's just so wonderful to be around like-minded folks and just be able to enjoy looking out your window and seeing not only birds, but bees and butterflies and a whole array of critters come by. Great for our water too, saving water for our rivers. 30 to 60% of our fresh water in American cities is used just for watering lawns, according to the EPA. Not trying to hate on turf, there's certainly a time and a place for it, but when it's just covering your whole landscape and the only time we seem to walk on it is when we mow it, we can start trying to fill in those areas that we don't use with native plants instead of using turf as the default plant. Kentucky bluegrass requires about 48 inches of rainfall a year. We don't get anywhere near that out here. Maybe in a good year we get 9, 10, 11 inches of rain. So we have to supplement that with our irrigation water. So again, more opportunities to save water for our rivers. Plants do a really good job at filtering any sort of chemicals and sediment before the runoff takes place. A landscape full of turf and pavement allows for little room for the water to soak and percolate into the soil, and it just runs off down into our gutters and back into our streams. Using fewer chemicals, you will start to love native plants because they're hardy. They've co-evolved with our harsh ecosystem. They require fewer chemicals, pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, you name it. There's a natural checks and balance in play with native insects. Again, they're hardy little guys and you won't have the need for chemicals. Turf is just a finicky plant, requires a lot of water, a lot of chemicals to keep it green and lush, and we don't need that. We can have a beautiful landscape full of native plants. You'll still be outside maintaining your landscape. It'll just be in a different way than you're used to, and it can be when it's on your schedule. You don't have to be tied to your lawnmower. You can certainly cut down on noise pollution. And to get the native plants started, really they need some good weeding and some water to get them established. But by the second or third growing season, they're really off and on their own, and you can really let them be. And you can still have a beautiful landscape. I often get the question or statement that I live in an HOA. They're not going to let me have a messy landscape. Well, of course not. No one wants to see a messy landscape regardless of what plants are being used. You can still have a very formal looking landscape with a design of native plants. That's just the arrangement of your plant palette. And we'll, as you go through the slideshow, you'll see some great examples of some nice looking gardens. That doesn't mean it's overrun with weeds. Sometimes people think, oh, well, if I'm in the HOA and I have a native plant garden, that means I have a weed patch. No, no, no. So what are the components of the Habitat Hero Garden to get that beautiful plaque I showed earlier? Native plants, native plants, native plants. A diversity in colors and textures and bloom times, and offering food sources throughout the growing season. And arranging it through a variety of habitat structure, offering those different niches. So you have your canopy, your mid-story, your understory, but also noting where you live and trying to mimic your surrounding natural landscape. If you're way east of I-25, you're probably more in the shortgrass prairie territory. You don't have a huge canopy. So again, trying to mimic your surrounding natural landscape. Having a water source, great for drinking, great for bathing. A running water source in the winter is so great for beefing up your bird diversity too. Removal of your non-native plants that have the potential to outcompete and degrade your habitat and beyond and become invasive. And that can be done going out into your yard and actively removing any of invasive plants on the noxious weed list. And it can also be next time you go to the nursery, opting for the native variety or regionally adapted plants, so you're not perpetuating that cycle of introducing more non-native plants. Again, a green landscape, looking at reducing to the point where you don't use chemical fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, you name it. Elimination of hazards, as you're creating a safe space for birds and pollinators alike to come visit your space. We also want to make it safe for them. Some things that you can do could be keeping your cats inside or talking to your neighbors about keeping their cats inside and alternatives for that. Reducing your outdoor lighting, specifically during migration in the fall and the spring. Reflectives or decals on your window to help with bird strikes. Looking at strategic placement of bird feeders. Those are all things that you can do to contribute to adding a safe space. Because again, you're going to be inviting in all these critters. You want to make it a nice, safe home. Other things you can do to enhance your landscape, added stewardship components, leaf litter and brush piles, pollinator houses, bird feeders, you name it. Doesn't just have to be plants, even a rain barrel counts. So those are all the things you can put on your landscape, but what do you get out of it too? You could do the Great Backyard Bird Count coming up. Have some community science projects. You can volunteer. We talked about those opportunities as well. So that's kind of a high-level overview on the program. Now we want to get into the nuts and bolts on why native plants are so great. The past criteria for selecting plants in our landscapes really looked at the focus on a decorative value. The right plant for right place was right soil, right water, right light requirements. Did my plant grow? Must have been the right plant. And that includes both from a homeowner's perspective, but also from the green industry perspective, where we're trying to change that focus. Whereas our future criteria for selecting plants in our landscapes, we're really starting to think about, well, what are these ecosystem services that native plants have to offer for us? Again, this is from a homeowner perspective as we go to a nursery and select plants, but it's also in the green industry if you're working with landscape designers or working in the nursery industry. And the emphasis is starting to shift just a little bit. The momentum is starting to swing in that direction, more and more native plants for the food web value support that they offer. Carbon sequestration and soil restoration, watershed value and weather moderation our enjoyment of nature, and just our mental health. I think that's why so many of us like to garden, right? So that mental health piece, it's a lot more fun than mowing the lawn, I'll tell you that. And plants do just such a fabulous job at providing food for birds that you're really going to see your bird diversity increase. I love bird feeders. In fact, right now our spruce out front has a zillion handmade bird feeders from our 2 kiddos with the pine cones and the peanut butter and the bird seed. It's so fun to put that out. But you know who we also attract? We attract a lot of squirrels, and we get that question a lot at Audubon. I'm sure you do it as well. How do I attract more of the pretty songbirds we hear all the time to our yard, like the western tanager? All I get are common grackles and squirrels. What am I doing wrong? And my answer for you is add plants. Birds have co-evolved alongside plants, can seek them out based on chemical pheromones, based on look, and the shelter that they provide. A bird feeder, sometimes it might be out in the open. Birds don't want to flit out in the open. They want to be able to be tucked in and flit around from branch to branch and be covered and have that shelter and security from predators or from weather. And plants also offer a complete meal. I love a snack. Everyone loves a good granola bar. It helps them get to the next meal. It's kind of like what a bird feeder does. But offering plants from a food, or offering food from a plant source, means the birds get a full meal. Say a bird picks off a berry full of sugar and carbohydrates, but they might also at the same time get a aphid full of protein. They might get a pollen grain full of fat, and you're hitting on all those notes of macro and micronutrients. Insects, they truly tell the most compelling story on how and why native plants matter most. Here's some of Douglas Tallamy's work. In the plant and insect world or kingdoms. 90% of our herbivorous insects can only feast on a plant lineage or certain plant species that they've co-evolved alongside with. Just the monarch and milkweed gets all the attention, but that's really kind of the norm in the world. So that means a landscape full of non-native plants. You're attracting a lot of bugs that we consider your pests. They'll wreak havoc on your landscape. Those are the ones we don't want. In fact, what we do want to celebrate is a little bit of leaf holes in your plants. About 25 to 30% of plant tissue loss can get lost in our plants before they succumb to any damage. Those plant holes mean we're feeding bugs, which means we're feeding birds. And there's going to be a natural checks and balance in play when you start using native plants, because you're attracting the native bugs. Again, we don't want the pests that wreak havoc on our landscape, like the Japanese beetle. And a world without insects is truly a world without biological diversity from kind of a few different standpoints. Some of us like to look out our window and see all the beautiful creatures that can come visit in our yard. If any of you have kids or grandkids, you'll see the joy in their eyes when they see birds. Birds are constantly around at any time of the day, any time of the year. It's easier to connect with nature through the lens of a bird, since we see them all the time versus, say, like a lion or a tiger from a kiddo standpoint. If nature is not your thing, maybe food is your thing. We need food, or healthy food. Every 2 and 3 bites of food that we consume come from insect pollinators. So we would have more and more processed foods on our plates if we had less of these wonderful pollinating insects around. So Douglas Tallamy and his team, what they did was they took a leaf blower, believe it or not. They reversed the mechanism on it to switch it from a blowing, from it blowing to sucking in material, and they sucked in the organic matter off of various tree species. And what they were specifically looking for were caterpillars. Caterpillars make wonderful baby bird food. They're jam-packed full of protein. They're soft-bodied to shove down the throats of baby birds. And in this team, what they were looking at is how many species of caterpillars, an abundance of caterpillars, live on native trees in contrast to our non-native counterparts. Bet you can all guess that the picture on the left is the one that supports, or is the one that is our native plant that supports the most species of caterpillars. This is a common oak. In contrast to the picture on the right, this is a common ginkgo, a very commonly non-native plant that's used in treescapes, especially in the city of Fort Collins. This is like their #1 go-to plant in cityscapes between the sidewalk and the road. But they certainly don't have the abundance of caterpillars. Caterpillars are also really easily identifiable by the naked eye, which makes this project doable. Kind of like dog species, we can identify a Great Dane versus a Dachshund pretty well. Caterpillars are the same way once you get to know their identifying characteristics down to color, markings, hair, etc. But if you are a mama bird or a dada bird in search of food, 537 different species of caterpillar on one tree in contrast to 4 species of caterpillars on the non-native counterpart. That's a life-threatening difference, right? So the first study was done in 1961. It's been replicated a few times, but the poster child of it was the mountain chickadee. But it's been replicated since. And we're looking at how many caterpillars does it take to rear one family of chickadees. So what they did, they looked at mom and dad bringing back caterpillars to the nest around the clock. And in one day, they would bring back between 390 and 570 caterpillars back to the nest. A chickadee family takes about 14 to 16 days to fledge. An average clutch size is about 4. Any quick mathematicians will quickly see that you need anywhere between 6 and 9,000 caterpillars to rear one family of chickadees. I wonder if you're this American kestrel here, you're a bird of a much larger size compared to a chickadee that weighs about 1/3 of an ounce, a couple pennies worth. Kestrel's going to need a heck of a lot more caterpillars to rear their young. What about if you want more than just one family of chickadees? You're going to need a lot of plants to support a lot of insects, to support a lot of birds, to support the whole food web. There are wonderful plant lists out there for larval host plants to attract caterpillars. On that resources page that I sent in the link in the chat box earlier, step 2 directs you to the native plant database searchable by zip code. And one of the very first things you can toggle for in that is searching for plants that attract insects, that will start to attract the beautiful songbirds, if you will. You can also search the plant list by what birds you want to attract, but it works really well the other way too, what food sources that you're trying to have on the plants. And you can filter out based on height, color, bloom times, etc. as well. It's a really great tool now. But some of the plants that would work really well, a sand cherry. You cannot go wrong with a sand cherry. It's a USDA Hardy Zone 3. So it grows really well along the whole front range. It's great for windbreaks. It does not need a lot of water. In fact, you can overwater it and it will start to explode or even start to thicken out. It has wonderful blooms that, depending on the season that we have, they might start blooming in early to mid-April. You'll start to attract the bees early on in the season, giving them a much needed food source early on in the growing season. And then later on, that thicket or undergrowth provides great shelter for birds to forage around, look for insects. And then, of course, they have the berries that ripen later on in the fall. Just a wonderful plant. It's easy to grow. It's really found in nurseries. That's the other thing, too. You might find a great plant in the plant list, but if you can't find it in the nursery, well, then that's really tough. So I tried to put plants on this plant list that are readily found in our local nurseries. Wouldn't be much of a Audubon presentation if we didn't talk about the birds that we're trying to attract. I mentioned earlier that 96% of our terrestrial birds feed their young insects. So having a lot of larval host plants in your landscape is critical to their survival. Picture on the top left is a downy woodpecker, but you might also get my personal favorite. I love the nuthatches, the pygmy nuthatch. Oh goodness, they're just so darn cute. And I love nuthatches when they run face down. They're nearsightedness, looking for insects close up to the bark. They're just cute, gregarious little creatures. The picture on the top right, we have the house finch. You might also attract some grosbeaks as well. Swallows, the picture in the middle left is of a barn swallow. You probably won't have swallows nesting in your yard, but they're great for insect control. Depending on where you're at, you might see the bank or cliff swallows, and then our climate threatened violet green swallows as well. Tyrant flycatchers, here's a picture of our western kingbird in the middle right photo. Blackbirds, here on the bottom left is our common grackle. Might even attract some meadowlarks too, and they're beautiful springtime songs. I'm waiting for that just around the corner. And then your bottom right, here's a picture of a song sparrow. Another great food source to have is berries, and you can have those for 2 different times of the year. Flash fruits are great for fall migration. A flash fruit is something that's fleshy and ready to be eaten right then and there, like picking an apple right off the tree. You can eat it right then and there. It's great for those birds, again, gearing up for migration in the fall. They're carbo loading on all those sugars. But then you can also have persistent fruits that last into the winter. Those are for your birds that didn't migrate. They're your resident birds. And they need food, especially when our resources are most scarce. And those fruits undergo a series of thawing and freezing, like a hawthorn tree, until the fruit is ready to be consumed late into the winter. One of my favorite plants for providing fruit is the three-leaf sumac. It's fragrant, it's perfect hedge height. It gets about 6 to 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide, so you get a lot of bang for your buck. The birds love the fruit, offers great shelter for birds as well, and it's readily found in nurseries. It requires very little water. It works for USDA Hardy Zone 3. You can use it on the north side of your property for a windbreak. And birds love fruit. I mentioned earlier I'm in Fort Collins, but Larimer County has a diverse landscape just like you all. And it goes all the way up into Estes Park, right at the eastern edge of Rocky Mountain National Park, where that's bear territory. And we can't just leave out plates of fresh fruit for birds because we'll be attracting bears as well. This is a really nice opportunity to still attract birds to your yard in a safe way when I'm talking about some folks that live in the montane environment as well. Not that a bear is not going to not come to your bush, but it's not as easy pickings as just a tray of fruit. The picture in the top left is your cedar waxwing. That was pretty cool. Clark, you mentioned the Bohemian waxwings earlier. The top right picture is of a Bullocks oriole. The Baltimore oriole, believe it or not, has been cited, credible sources, on some of our bioblitzes, either here in Larimer County or just north of us in the southern Wyoming in Laramie and Cheyenne. Of course, those are the anomalies and the stray ones, but when I do see a posting every so often of a Baltimore oriole, it can happen, but we really don't have them out here. The middle left is of a Townsend solitaire. Picture in the middle right, we have the Swainson's thrush feasting on a red elderberry. The bottom left, we got the black-headed grosbeak. And then the picture on the bottom right is your American crow. So a lot of different varieties of birds that love fruit. Nectar. This is where you get all the fun pollinators too, not just the birds. Providing that high octane fuel. And just like you and I don't eat a couple months of the year, so do our pollinators. They need to eat throughout the growing season, not just June and July and August. They usually need to eat early April all the way through the end of October, depending on the year for those insects. So having things that bloom early, in the middle, and at the end is really key for attracting birds and bees and butterflies, beetles, ants, you name it, to your garden. Penstemons, you can't go wrong with these guys. There's about 250 different species in the genre. They're all brightly colored. They're great for a mixed perennial border. They tend to be either low growing or up to about 2-3 feet tall. They oftentimes even work well from growing from seed instead of starter plants. So that's an affordable option as well. And a lot of nurseries carry a variety of penstemons too. Milkweed, these are great mid-season blooming perennials. You'll start the giant the blooms or clusters of blooms are great landing pads for butterflies as well. We have the showy, the swamp, and the showy swamp and butterfly milkweed that work really well here on the Front Range, depending on your watering requirements. The swamp milkweed, hence the name, likes to be down by riparian areas, need a lot of water. Showy needs moderate range, and then the butterfly milkweed, that's the orange one, I couldn't think of the name. And that one is great for a desert garden. Late season blooming perennial, rabbit brush, giant yellow clusters, butterfly magnet to the max, readily found in nurseries, easy to grow. Great for the back of the garden. They can get up to 5 feet tall. Ours it's only 2 seasons and it's already about 4 feet tall. It's huge. And this is fun. You'll start to note who else comes to your garden beyond just birds. Butterflies, wasps, ants, and beetles. These are great pollinators. Dragonflies and even moths. And even bats. So a lot of different critters will be coming to your garden. And I bet you'll be curious to know who they are too. So you'll be birding and noting pollinators alike. Nuts and seed, this is a great winter food source for protein. We want to mimic our natural surrounding landscape, which means let's incorporate a lot of our native grasses. And to leave those seed heads intact for the winter, you don't need to tidy up your garden in the fall. You don't need to mow those grasses in the fall. A great time for cleanup is in the spring. Insects oftentimes overwinter in the stalks of the grass stems. And again, you're leaving those seed heads intact. A fun fact for you tonight, I mentioned earlier that 96% of our terrestrial birds feed their young insects. Well, one who does not feed their young insects, but actually seed heads. Could you imagine feeding seed heads to your little ones? But is the American goldfinch, pictured here on a coneflower. A great plant to incorporate into your mixed perennial garden for sure. Some birds that you'll attract by offering nuts and seeds for the birds that don't migrate, that will be sticking around. We've got our dark-eyed juncos. You might have some grosbeaks or jays as well. Chickadees, the black-capped chickadee, maybe a mountain chickadee too. The American goldfinch, the white-crowned sparrow, pine grosbeak, look at how chubby this guy is, and then your American robin. All of these guys will love having that winter food source around with nuts and seeds. Again, you want to arrange your native plants in a variety of habitat layers, offering those different niches. Some ground cover, some leaf litter for juncos, towhees, wrens, sparrows to forage around in, having that mid-story. And your canopy layer, again, it's not going to be a massive canopy like what we think of in the jungle, but having some height is really nice as well. And I mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to just be all plants. You can mix and match with other components to enhance your landscape. You can start to get a little creative, have some do-it-yourself projects with some of these components as well. A water source, you don't have to go all out with an elaborate water source unless you have a deep passion for water ecology and understanding of the upkeep and have a lot of extra income to throw at a water source, because that could be very elaborate to have one of those fancy koi ponds. It can be a cake pan lid flipped over, adding some different sized rock and gravel for perching areas and filling it up with water for, and you could have some art and painting on the bottom of it to get the kids involved with projects like that. Some of my favorites are the running water, the heated water baths in the wintertime. You'll really start to see the increase in bird diversity, especially in the winter if you have that running water source. And then in the spring, featured here, you have the hummer bathing in the fresh water source. Shelter and nest sites, evergreens, you can't go wrong. They're great for shelter from predators, from weather, and they make for just a beautiful addition to your landscape. Brush piles, depending on zoning, where you live, fire mitigation, all of that, you have to take that into consideration. But brush piles can work really well depending on location, leaving some holes big enough for the birds to flit in and out. At the very least, leaving your leaf litter behind instead of bagging that up. Again, there's a lot of birds that like to forage for insects on the ground. Leaving snags or dead material, does not need to be a dead tree that's looming on your house or your neighbor's house by any means. It can just be some fallen logs and dead twigs. It'll replenish the soil and enrich everything. If you're familiar with Jim Tolstrup at High Plains Environmental Center in Loveland, Colorado, or if you've seen some of his talks, he always talks about the dead material as the life of the landscape, how I did a portion, the majority of the portion of this program on plants. He'll flip it on its head and talk about all the great benefits that having dead material in your landscape has. Having bird and pollinator houses, feeders, those are all great things to have on your landscape. Rain barrels now being approved in Colorado too. Here's the picture on the bottom right with bird feeders. One of my favorite websites to outsource our birdhouses at for our school programs is Birdhouse Depot. They have pre-cut slabs of wood, all the instructions on how to assemble it. So you get the hands-on feel, but the best part is they tell you exactly what birds you're going to attract, and all the specs are designed for that specific bird species. So it takes all that guesswork out of it, noting the hole size, how high to put it off the ground, where to strategically place it in your landscape. They have all of those directions for a variety of different bird species. Again, that's Birdhouse Depot. We love them for a lot of our school projects that we use them for. So hopefully I've inspired you to want to get involved with either Habitat Hero or even learn about all our programs at Audubon Rockies, which I'm sure you're familiar with being within the chapter. But again, go to that resources page. You can learn about how you can enhance or start from scratch from growing your garden. Upcoming events. This is the time of year where we have events. Every Tuesday from 11:30 to 12:30, we do a lunch hour webinar series and invite local community partners to deliver a presentation. Sometimes it's on birds, sometimes it's on gardening, sometimes it's on community science. Our next one on Tuesday, that will be the 21st, will be an Audubon Rockies staff member, Jacqueline Downey, giving a presentation on connecting all kids with nature, or all ages of kids with nature. The week after that one, as a teaser, is February 28th, and that's Ashley Kruger with the Gardens on Spring Creek, which is our local botanic gardens, and she'll be talking about empathy in the garden. Hopefully, after you've had a chance to plant your garden, we encourage you to certify it to get that recognition and inspire your neighbors to do the same. And volunteer. If you would like to come up to Weld County, we have a project in Johnstown where we're planting our largest Habitat Hero demonstration garden on a solar field. It'll be about 5,000 or just a little bit less than 5,000 plants that we'll be putting in the ground the weekend of Mother's Day. The big community planting day will be Saturday, May 13th. If you sign up for our newsletter or just stay tuned, we'll have that event link go live probably the back half of March. So we're still a couple weeks off before we're actively recruiting volunteers, but you can at least save the date and know that's coming down the pipe. So hopefully I see some of you there. And then here's my contact information on the screen. If you want to reach out via email, phone, if you want more information on our website, please, please, please reach out to me. And then I can also add that contact information in the chat box feature. But I want to thank you all too for joining us for a presentation. I know the roads are crummy and probably just easier to stay snuggled under your blanket and call it a night, but it's really nice to know that there are people like you in the world that care about birds, and you are truly what hope looks like for a bird. And it's so nice that you want to take time out of your busy schedule to join me tonight and hopefully inspire you to create a bird-friendly garden of your own or enhance it and bring in more birds to your yard. So with that, we'll open it up for Q&A. And I can stop sharing my screen and also share some links in the chat box feature and my contact information too.